Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.com. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website, www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Tonight on the program, we will be joined by Deja Alvarez, a candidate for state representative in the 182nd District. Our own Lance Haver will walk us through the latest water department rate hike. We will preview tomorrow's mayoral budget address, and our very own Denise Clay Murray will update us on the trial of Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson. Denise, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It sounds like I want to say you had an eventful day, but I'm not sure
Well,
that.
it was an eventful day if you like paper trails. For the last few days I've been sitting in court and anytime someone says, "Well, our government doesn't care enough um about climate change and about, the environment." One of the things I will say is if if we really did care as much about the environment as we should, the Justice Department would have to use a lot less paper. And I think that that's one of the things that's holding us back because if nothing else, I've seen they like paper. Lawyers like paper a lot.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about that in the second half of this show. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. Looking forward to spring. The weather was somewhat of a surprise.
Yeah. And tomorrow is supposed to be 75, I think, and sunny, and then we get cool again.
Those poor plants.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad I'm not a farmer.
As my mom used to call it, it's pneumonia weather.
Yes, yeah. And this is actually one of the reasons why Philadelphia streets are as unaccommodating as they are. There was a hearing not too long ago where they talked about why we have to spend so much money on street repairs. And there's an expert who said the reason is the climate. It gets too hot and too cold too close together in Philadelphia. If you go to colder climates, it's not as bad. And if you go to warmer climates, it's not as bad. The Mid Atlantic region has notoriously bad roads for that reason. So you can't blame city council entirely for that. But,
No.
We'll
so
try.
so Lance, the big thing we want to open with is this water department rate hike we've been hearing about.
Right. So the water department has held its public hearing, and almost nobody showed up. I was there, and there were a big three other people other than all the paid staff. And if we could start with the slideshow, I think you'll see why so few people showed up. So this is how the water department said there's going to be a rate increase. They said there's going to be a notice of a special rate proceeding regarding the reconciliation and potential downward adjustment of water, sewer, and stormwater rates and charges approved in the 2021 rate proceeding. Well, that sounds pretty good, right? It sounds like rates are going to go down. But of course, it's disingenuous. That's not at all what's happening. If we could skip to the next slide, what's happening is the public advocate agreed to allow a rate increase last year and allow a potential rate increase this year of 6.4%. So the rates will go up in September of this year. The question is, how much will they go up? But the hearing notice didn't say that. The hearing notice didn't say the rates might go up by 6.4%. The hearing notice said this is a hearing on how much the rates are going to come down. So the fact that the hearing notice didn't tell the truth starts to set up a number of questions and a number of problems. If we can go to the next slide, you'll see that one of the things that's happening here is the water department failed to secure any of the stimulus money, any of the COVID money. And this is a direct quote from the filing of the water department. After confirming that no federal stimulus funding, as defined in the settlement, was directly received by the Philadelphia Water Department, the department maintains that no adjustment to the fiscal year 2023 approved rates are warranted. That comes from the fact sheet. That's behind the public notice that says this is a hearing about reducing the rates. So the rate increase is already approved. The only question is, will it be slightly less or significantly less or the exact amount that was already approved? And because the water department failed to secure any stimulus money and failed to increase its productivity and failed to implement any significant improvements in its operation, the water department says, now we need every single penny that we were promised. If we can go to the next slide. Here is, and I hope everyone can see it, here is what the water department says they're going to get. The bills are exceedingly high now for most people. The average water bill is $69.15. The water department is saying already approved is $73.60 starting on September 1st, 2022. Now, I don't think anyone will be shocked to see or hear that the water department would like every single penny that has been promised. And the question is, what's going to happen to consumers? If we could go to the next slide, please. So how do we get to this point? How do we get to where the water department's already been given a 6.4% increase, and now the burden of proof instead of is on the water department showing why they need more money, somehow the burden of proof is on consumers to somehow prove they don't need the increase. So this is a result of the public advocate's agreement with the water department. In the last rate case, the public advocate, who, by the way, has never filed a public financial disclosure form, has never filed a conflict of interest form. The public advocate agreed to a rate increase in 2021 and agreed to a rate increase in 2022 that would be lower if the water department got stimulus dollars. And what was in the agreement was for the water department had to exert its best efforts to obtain stimulus money. And it had to exert its best efforts to improve operations. There was no definition of what this meant. No amount of work hours, no amount of staff. Nobody said what it means for a best effort. Instead, what was in there was a complete 100% bailout, a guaranteed bailout for the water department if it failed to get any stimulus dollars and if it failed to improve its operations. It was guaranteed the 6.4% increase by the public advocate. And what's really upsetting on some level is there's $150 million in surplus. It's in a fund that they call the Rate Stabilization Fund. That's really a slush fund. The money's not allocated for anything. So there's $150 million that's sitting there that can be used so a rate increase isn't necessary. And when you start to look at this and you say, well, where is that money? It becomes even more upsetting. That money is in U.S. Bank. U.S. Bank is a bank that has no retail branches in the city of Philadelphia. And if that money was moved to a credit union, it would employ Philadelphians. It would recirculate in the Philadelphia economy. People would get mortgages, car loans, home equity loans, and it would be an economic driver for the region. Instead, with the agreement of the public advocate, the money sits at U.S. Bank, which takes the money out of our city and uses it elsewhere. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Why would the public advocate agree to this, right? So they're agreeing to a rate increase in 2021, a rate increase in 2022. They're agreeing to allow the money to be kept in a bank that has no branches in Philadelphia. They're agreeing to invert the normal proof. So in most rate cases, the burden of proof is on the utility. The public advocate inverted that, so now the public has to prove that the water department doesn't need the rate increase, as opposed to the water department having to prove that they do need the rate increase. So the burden is much harder to meet. And the reason, in my opinion, is because the public advocate was given an inducement. And again, this comes from the hearing examiner. The rate board approved the joint petition for partial settlement, that was last year, entered into by the department, meaning the water department, and the public advocate. By approving the settlement, the rate board is agreeing in advance that both the department and the public advocate will be deemed to be participants. So by agreeing to these terms, the public advocate received a no-bid contract for this rate case. They didn't open it up for other people to seek the representation for the public. There was no negotiation over the fees. They simply, because they agreed to the rate increase and the other terms in the settlement agreement last year, they were automatically named a lawyer for this. So their law firm got a no-bid contract as an inducement for signing on the agreement. If we could go to the next slide. So here are the ethical failures. The public advocate's law firm was given a no-bid contract as part of the agreement to raise rates. The financial disclosure forms of the public advocate has not been made part of the record. Not even the hearing examiner's financial disclosure forms are made part of the record. And there have been no conflict of interest statements that have been filed and made part of the record. Now, under the Right to Know Act, I have asked for all of these documents from the city. And for all of us who have tried to get documents from the city, you may know that you file something, they send you a very polite email saying, thanks for contacting us, we'll get back to you. And I'll wait, and when we get them, I will report back on it. But as of right now, when you go to the rate board, the Philadelphia Water Rate Board, and you look through the filings, there are no financial disclosure forms for the advocate, for the judge. There are no statements of conflict of interest. None of that exists. Now, someone could say, well, why am I worried about that? If we go to the next slide, I'll show you why I'm concerned about that. So here's the actual conflict of interest. The law firm, the public advocate's law firm, the president of the law firm has as a key client of his, he's a lawyer, has a key client of U.S. Bank. That's U.S. Bank that not only holds the $150 million, but also serves as a bond agent for Philadelphia Water Department. Both of these services are awarded without bid. There is no bidding process to try and save money. There's no bidding process to look at where the money's going to sit in which bank. It's simply awarded to the bank and to the agent, the bond agent to U.S. Bank, which not only is the key client for the president of the law firm, but the treasurer of the law firm represents Vanguard. Vanguard is the second largest stockholder in U.S. Bank. Now, in normal proceedings, these would be conflict of interest, and the law firm would have to show and have to announce and have to disclose that they have this conflict of interest, and then the hearing examiner would rule whether it's a significant one or not. I think it's a significant one. Maybe somebody else would say, well, look, these people are so wealthy that what difference does it make if they represent U.S. Bank or not? That's not enough to tip their hand. But the fact that they refuse to put on record, and it's not in the file, and there's no disclosure of the conflict of interest is very troubling. We can go to the next slide. So the questions become the following. Why doesn't the public advocate have an advisory board made up of civic, labor, and religious leaders? The public advocate has isolated himself. He has no one he responds to. He was given a no-bid contract as an inducement to agreeing to the last rate increase, and he has no one he answers to now. There's no public discussion. There's no civic groups. As I said, they did such a poor job of announcing the last rate increase, and the public advocate allowed them to use that language that appears that there's no rate increase, so nobody showed up. Why does the public advocate refuse to advocate for moving that $150 million from U.S. Bank into a local credit union? Could it have to do with the fact that the president and treasurer of his law firm have conflict of interest? And why doesn't the public advocate go on record saying how much money a public bank would save water consumers? When we have a public bank, if it does if it serves as a bond agent for the water department, that would mean a significant reduction in water rates because the coverage ratio, the amount that they have to over-collect, would drop. And finally, why can't we see the conflict of interest statements? If we can go to the next slide. So I said the hearing turnout was so poor. Only 5 people showed up. Now, we're a city of, as Denise says all of the time, we are the largest poor city, the largest city with the largest perception of the largest collection of low-income people in the nation. So it's hard to believe that of all of the people who are struggling to pay with rising PGW bills, rising gas at the pump, rising food prices, it's hard to believe that if people knew the water rates were going to go up again in the second year, that they wouldn't want to say something. But only 5 people showed up. So in my mind, the question is it incompetency on the public advocate's part, or did he purposely want to keep this private so he could have another agreement that he could enter into without any type of criticism or any type of public exposure? Why don't we know how many water consumers have applied for and received assistance from the federal low-income household water assistance program? Now, that's a great program. That is one of the programs that comes out of the stimulus dollars. Each ratepayer can get $2,500 for water and $2,500 for sewer. These are not loans, these are grants, so up to $5,000. We can't get a report on how many people the water department has helped get these grants. Even though it's in everyone's interest for people to get them, the water department won't say how many have gotten it. And finally, why aren't more people on the low-income water program? PGW has 70,000 families on its program. The water department has 15,000. The water department has 1/3 of the number. Now, to qualify for the program, it's 150% of poverty or less. So everyone who qualifies for the PGW program also qualifies for the water program. PGW is a municipal utility. The city owns it. Water department's a municipal utility. City owns it. You would think that everyone who qualifies for the PGW plan would automatically enroll in the water department's low-income plan. Very simple, same quality. Water department doesn't have many offices. PGW still has regional offices. Very easy process. But the water department refuses to do that, and the public advocate is silent about that. If we could go to the next slide, and I'll wrap up. Here's the final thing I would like to ask. If the public advocate and the Philadelphia Water Rate Board guarantee the Philadelphia Water Department money from our pockets, why is anyone surprised when the water department's best efforts are not enough to bring in stimulus and federal dollars? What is it that would require them to actually work at this? So while we know, and I'm sure we're going to talk about in the budget section, while we know the city has stimulus dollars it hasn't used, and we know the state has stimulus dollars it hasn't used, the water department, because they've been guaranteed a rate increase, hasn't gone to the city, hasn't gone to the state and tried to draw down that money. They haven't even made an argument for why it's necessary. And frankly, why should they? If the so-called consumer advocate who's supposed to be representing us agrees to a rate increase and the Philadelphia Water Rate Board says, sure, you can have it, why would anyone expect the water department to go after more money from someplace else? And that's really what we face. And the only hope we have is that our city council people will become concerned enough about the rising water rates and the failure of the water department to get the federal dollars for low-income people, and the failure of the water department to enroll people in the low-income plan, that the council will become aware of this during the hearings, and that they will actually intervene and make sure that we are represented in the water case.
Lance, every time we talk about this, something new and the nicest way I could say unusual happens, right? So we have a water department that didn't go after federal funding when it was abundant.
What they'll say is they made their best effort, but they failed miserably. You know, it's like the kid in school who says, "Well, I tried to do my homework." Why is that acceptable?
Right, and everybody else got federal funding.
That's right.
It doesn't matter what you were; you got money from the government.
Right.
So that's the first thing, right?
Well, and I'll let you ask your question, but my question is, who is this public advocate? You say they're a law firm. Who are they?
It's Robert Ballinger from Community Legal Services, and he refuses to disclose that the four board members, the operating board members, are all representatives of corporate America. The president, as I said, is a lawyer for a major law firm. The vice president is the legal counsel for Chubb Insurance. The treasurer is the legal counsel for Vanguard. And the secretary, and this is of the executive team, the secretary of the board is a lawyer for a major law firm. So their orientation is completely divorced from poor and working people. Now, in the past, what would happen would be they would have a community board, and they would go out of their way to make sure the community's voices are heard. Mr. Ballinger has decided that he doesn't have to hear that somehow he, in his infinite wisdom, knows what poor and working people's lives are like, and that he should just tell them what's good for them. And the board, unfortunately, now that it has the executive board, now that it has no more poor working people on it, and they don't have an advisory board of clients, has said, okay, I guess that's all right. I mean, Mr. Ballinger is well educated. He did go to Penn Law School, so maybe he really does know everything. But it is the antithesis of what they're supposed to do, and it's also exceedingly unwise, because we know that change happens when poor and working people are organized and pushing. And so when you shut them out of the process, when you allow the water department to put up a notice saying these hearings are about a rate reduction and not include that the rates are already guaranteed to go up, that you shut the public out. And if you don't make an effort to organize people and bring them in, that their voices are not going to be heard. What's the old line? If you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
Mm-hmm. Is there any way that can change?
Well, I personally filed a challenge. I said it is immoral and wrong for an agreement to guarantee a no-bid contract as an inducement for agreeing to the rate increase. And the hearing examiner has barred me from raising that issue again. So I've appealed it to the rate board. And unfortunately, the Philadelphia Water Rate Board, I've also asked them to disclose the financial disclosure forms, any conflict of interest forms that have been filed. And as of yet, they have not made any of that part of the record. So we have to rely upon counsel. And I certainly will ask counsel when the water department shows up for its hearings and counsel. And that's one of the great things about the budget process. I'll certainly ask the city council to investigate.
Okay.
But why did they bar you from asking about it? If there isn't a problem, it shouldn't be a difficult thing to discuss.
It's always a mistake to try and answer for somebody else. So I don't know the answer. They did not like the fact that I said it's inappropriate for somebody to get a no bid contract as an inducement to sign an agreement for a rate hike.
So the water department will be before city council. I don't have the date in front of me, but I will get it when we come out of our next interview. But this is something we have to stay on top of, because it's confounding that this is happening. And
I was kind of stuck at the word salad. That was the legal announcement announcing this meeting. When you look at something like that, the whole purpose of that is to keep people from coming to the meeting, because, while we have an English to government, dictionary that allows us to translate this stuff, most people do not.
I agree, but in some ways, I don't blame the water department for trying to get everything. I blame the public advocate for letting them get away with it. That wording should have been challenged, shouldn't have been allowed. Should have said, unless you show up, the rates are going to go up by 6.4% on top of the rate increase they got last year. Mm-hmm. They shouldn't have allowed them to say there's no rate increase. All there's going to be is a rate reduction. It simply isn't true. There will not be a rate reduction. Absolutely not. The only thing that could happen is they don't get all of the 6.4%. But rates will not go down. That was not a true statement at all. And it's disconcerting that they were allowed to get away with it. by the hearing examiner and by the hearing examiner and by the hearing examiner and by the public advocate. And unfortunately, the only way consumers know what's going on is by watching Hall Monitor, listening to Hall Monitor. If you're not watching us on Comcast Channel 66 or listening to us on 106.5 FM or visiting our webpage at hallmonitor.org, you won't hear about it because the Inquirer doesn't have the staff to cover it anymore.
And most of them are at the trial with me.
Right. And that's a good segue to move on. So I will keep our listeners informed and do my best to bring this issue out. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you so much. All right. Well, what we're going to do next is play an interview we recorded with candidate Deja Alvarez for the 182nd House District. Now, I want to explain that we sent an invitation out to the other Democrats who are running in that seat. Two of them have gotten back to us, so we're going to schedule interviews with them in the near future, which will be the same format and very similar to the interview we just did because we want it to be fair. But this is our first interview with a candidate from the 182nd District.
And if we can just add, it's an open seat.
That's right. It is an open seat, yes. Okay, we are here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia. Deja Alvarez, who is the Democratic candidate for state representative in the 182nd District. Thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So tell us about the 182nd District.
Oh, so in general or kind of what the 182nd District means to me?
What it means to you.
What it means to me. I'm a very proud Latina transgender woman. And the 182nd District is where I kind of grew into being me. It is where I have done everything from live on the streets of the 182nd District, trying to find ways to survive because, we live in a world that society still doesn't believe that folks like me should exist, to thriving on these very streets, to somebody that has been instrumental in some of the changes here in Philadelphia, whether it's with the Philadelphia Police Department and the mayor's office and the district attorney's office. So for me, the 182nd District is home. The 182nd District is where my story began, and being able to run for this seat now, being in the position that I'm in, is full circle for me. It's kind of like that circle of life. It started out with me trying to figure out how to survive. And now here I am running to be the state rep in the 182nd District. I did have to move out of the district for a while, but my office has always been here. My work has always been here. And, like a lot of people in Philadelphia, this is the most expensive district in the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So a lot of people cannot afford to live right here in Center City. So I did have to move outside of Center City for several years. But I still worked here. I still, patronized the businesses here. My life was still kind of here. And so when I got the opportunity almost 2 years ago to move back into the district and, essentially come home, I was very excited. So the 182nd District represents just who I am as a person, where I've come from and how far I've gone.
Okay. Now, if elected, what will your primary focuses be in Harrisburg?
So, in light of the pandemic, obviously, we have to focus on economic resurgence, both for families and for small businesses in Center City. Small businesses in Center City, Philadelphia, are the financial backbone of the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And what I've learned from not just the businesses that I frequent, but also the people that I've been, kind of going door to door and talking with some of the small business owners to find out what their concerns are. A lot of them have been hit with a large tax bill on the back of 2 years of not being able to do business the way that they're used to. So they're really struggling. And so for me, I want to go into Harrisburg and I want to help some of these small businesses, whether it's offering them tax incentives or figuring out some other ways that we can help strengthen their resolve as we're coming out of this pandemic. But I think that we also have to talk about quality of life issues. We have to talk about safety. We have to talk about people being comfortable in their homes here in this district. On any given night, you go to sleep, you wake up in the morning and you see the story of 200 motorbikes and ATVs circling around City Hall and, riding down our streets, and children are being woken up, in the middle of the night when they have to go to school in the morning. And this has become a very divisive issue. For me, it's not divisive. It's a quality of life issue. And no matter who you are, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, black or white, if you deserve to be comfortable in the home that you live in, and you deserve to be able to walk down the street by yourself or with your children or with your other friends and family members and not worry about getting run over by a group of bike riders on motorbikes. If you're driving your car down the street, you also deserve to feel safe in your car. You shouldn't be pushed to the side of the road by a group of bike riders that want to do wheelies going down the street. And again, I recognize it's a divisive issue because a lot of people say, well, if you talk about this, then you're going after, certain groups of people. No, you're not going after certain groups of people. You're going after whoever it is that's riding these motorbikes that is presenting a danger to other people. This isn't about class or race or anything else. It's really about quality of life, and everybody deserves a good quality of life.
Now, there are other Democrats in this primary. What makes you stand out?
I have done the work. I have been boots on the ground in Philadelphia, particularly in Center City, Philadelphia, for the last 2 decades, helping make change, whether it's for the trans communities, the LGBTQ communities, Black and brown communities, undocumented immigrant communities. I have put in the work. And I think that what I've done is representative of what we need more of in places where we're making legislation. For hundreds of years, we have viewed people in a very kind of classist, racist way. Like, you have to be of a certain background, from a certain family, brought up a certain way, have a certain amount of money, live in a certain place, be educated in a certain college to be seen as someone who's qualified to hold office and to create legislation. And after hundreds of years, here we are. Women's rights are on the line. Trans rights are on the line. LGBT rights are on the line. Public education is on the line. White supremacy is on the line, because we have elected all of these people into office that don't have an actual lived experience that's reflective of the city of Philadelphia and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're one of the poorest big cities in the entire country. But if you take a look at our legislator, it's not reflective of that. It's not reflective of people that understand homelessness on a personal level and then came back and worked on it in a professional capacity as well. So I have both the lived and professional experience to tackle the hard issues, to be able to discuss them in a very personal and professional way. And I think that that's what makes me stand out, because none of my competitors have that. None of my competitors have been boots on the ground battling with homelessness, helping people that are in addiction, helping people get access to medical care and mental health services on a daily basis. Yeah, they're all key issues that everybody talks about, but I want to see your resume. I want to see what you have actually done to make a difference in those things that you talk about. Because otherwise, you're just going to be another person that is elected to an office that is able to talk about the key issues, but you don't have the actual experience around those key issues to be able to address them with empathy, compassion, and passion. And for far too long, we've had people making rules, policies, and legislation about everyone else when they don't understand it.
One of the most important relationships the city of Philadelphia has is its relationship with Harrisburg.
Mm-hmm.
How would you make this relationship better for the benefit of the city and especially the public schools?
While I am very progressive just by nature, I am also extremely pragmatic. And what I've had to learn to do, especially as a trans woman, coming from where I come from, I've had to learn to be able to step back and take a look at the bigger picture. What is the goal? What is it that we need to accomplish here? How do we get accomplished? Who do I have to build a relationship with or build a bridge with in order to get it accomplished? So being able to remove my personal feelings from a situation because I'm able to focus on the goal. For me, I think that you have to be very pragmatic going into Harrisburg. You have to know what it is that we're trying to achieve and figure out the best way to achieve that. Going in there screaming and yelling and getting into fights with everybody is not going to get anything achieved in Harrisburg. When we are elected to represent the people of the 182nd District, the people of Philadelphia, and the people of the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Because although I'm representing the 182nd District, my vote matters in every piece of legislation that will affect all Pennsylvanians. So I have to remember that when I'm looking at this legislation or when I'm creating legislation, whoever will be affected by this legislation, those are the folks that need to be at the table with me so that we can go over these things and they can help me understand better how it will affect them. And I can also help them understand better. So for me, it's about listening, learning, and then legislating. You have to be able to listen so that you can learn. And then that's how you get legislation not only created, but passed, because you have to understand what it means for everybody. And everybody deserves to have a voice at the table. Everybody deserves to be represented. Whether you're poor or you're rich or what ethnicity or what background that you are, this should include you. And I think that that's another way that I'll be able to be effective in Harrisburg is that I can work with everyone. We don't have to agree on everything. We don't have to be best friends. Let's make sure we're concentrating on what's best for the folks of Pennsylvania.
Okay. Many of Philadelphia's leaders believe that the gun violence problem could be solved with better gun regulation. Harrisburg has traditionally disagreed with that. What would you do to help facilitate a true conversation about this?
So I think that we have to have an understanding about what guns mean to everybody. And that they're going to mean something different to every group. So if you're talking to very marginalized communities versus hunters versus, the Republicans versus the very liberals that are completely against guns. Let's also be clear, the gun violence is being committed. They're not using legal registered weapons, in these instances. So I absolutely feel as though we do need better gun regulation. I do not, for the life of me, understand why anybody needs a submachine gun. And I don't think anybody should have one. But I think we also have to, if we get a better understanding of where, let's say the right, the Republicans, and why they're so, no, you can't take my guns. And I think part of that is a lack of marketing. We are not communicating effectively that this isn't about taking all your guns away from you. This is about making it safer for everyone, for those that have access to guns, making it more difficult for those that do want to do harm with guns to get access to those guns. We're not trying to take everyone's guns away. We're not trying to just say, nope, you can't, you're not allowed to go hunting during the hunting season, or you're not allowed to protect your family. And I think that's where, everybody's butting heads, because this group thinks, oh, they're trying to take away all of our guns. And this group is saying, no, we really want common sense gun control. And then in the middle, everybody's also talking about the gun violence. And again, I stress the gun violence we're seeing is not due to licensed firearms. It's due to poverty. It's due, to what people are experiencing growing up, that they're not getting access to good education. They're not seeing hope in their communities. They're not seeing representation of themselves in the positions, in these seats where people are creating legislation around them. So I think we need to communicate more effectively with both sides so that this side understands, nope, we're not trying to take away all your guns. We're just trying to make it a little bit safer. And I think that that's going to start with getting a few people from each group to sit down at a table, have a conversation. And honestly, part of politics is marketing. As funny as that sounds, it really is. And a lot of people don't understand that we have to be able to market things to everybody clearly in a way that they understand it, so that it's not not in such a polarizing way. Right now, we have news on the right, news on the left. Everybody is marketing things, and it's very polarized. So I think we need to remove some of that and market it in a way that everybody can understand what's going on.
What will you be able to do in Harrisburg to impact Philadelphia's poverty epidemic?
What will I be able to do in Harrisburg? I myself will be able to do nothing. The truth is, none of us can do anything by ourselves. What I can do is take my lived experience as somebody that has experienced severe poverty and someone that still, I work 3 jobs while I'm campaigning in order to pay my bills. So I understand what it's like. I've also been homeless. I know what poverty feels like. So I take that empathy and compassion and that lived experience. And then I've also, my whole career over the last 2 decades has been spent working with people that are in poverty and helping them get access to resources. So I take those experiences with me. I take my passion and my drive to make a difference with me in the hopes that I will be able to work with the other folks in Harrisburg to start addressing this. Many times in politics, people want to hear what I call the fairy tale answers. They want to hear you make a bunch of promises that this is what I'm going to do when I get in Harrisburg. And for me, I find that I'm very authentic and I'm very honest about who I am, what I can and can't do, what I do know, what I don't know. And I think that we have to change the way that people view politics and politicians. We want that person that knows how to talk about the issue, but really hasn't ever worked on the issue. We don't want that person that is authentic and honest, because then we talk about, oh, they don't have the temperament to do this, or their demeanor is a little off, or, because they spoke so honestly. We're still in a place in society where people want politicians that sell them a dream. I don't want somebody to sell me a dream. I want somebody to be honest and authentic with me so that we can figure out how to really get the work done. And so, for me, I just bring all of myself. I bring all of my lived experience, all of my professional experience into Harrisburg, and I will absolutely work on the key issues because I've experienced those. But I'm not going to make anybody a promise, and I'm sure not going to tell anybody that I'm going to be the one person that is able to go into Harrisburg after thousands of others have been there and be able to get that one thing passed. Even right now, we're seeing a conversation about the equality bill for LGBTQ people here in Pennsylvania. And they're saying it still hasn't been passed. And they're blaming it on the first openly gay legislator that went into Harrisburg, Brian Sims. They're saying he was never able to get it passed. And so then there's somebody else running who's like, I'm going to get in there and get that passed. That is complete and utter bull. And forgive me for saying it so bluntly, but this is who I am as a person. You will always get an honest answer from me. I am just me. I don't know how to be anybody else. And that's just not the way that it works. But because that one person wasn't able to get that piece of legislation passed does not mean they haven't been working on it. They've been laying some of the groundwork. So hopefully the next one going into this seat will be able to continue with that groundwork and get it passed. But you're not going to be able to go in there and do it by yourself, nor should we be believing anybody that says, I can get this done. I just don't think it's realistic.
Okay. And last question. What else should people know about you or your campaign?
A lot of people talk about the working class. A lot of people talk about grassroots. I am the very definition of working class and grassroots. I'm not a political insider, although I have worked very hard to build political relationships because I learned very early on that helps to get things achieved for communities that need it the most. That doesn't make me a political insider. That makes me somebody that is able to take a look at a situation and say, okay, how best do we address this? Am I going to be the person standing on the outside with the bullhorn screaming at everybody? Or am I going to be the person that is willing to put myself on the line, build these relationships, and work with some people that I may not necessarily like because the outcome could benefit other folks? And so I am very grassroots. Again, I'm working 3 jobs while I'm campaigning. So you want to talk about working class? I am the working class. And I think that, again, this is what we're missing in Harrisburg. We're missing real lived experience, people that have experienced the worst and come out the other end and been able to turn all of that trauma and pain into doing the actual work and really making change.
All right, Deja Alvarez, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.com. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. And we'd like to thank Deja Alvarez for being with us. Now, Denise, what is going on with this trial?
Well, for one thing, I figured out why the federal government isn't as gung-ho about dealing with the environment and climate change as you would like them to be. It's because the Justice Department would not be able to put on a case if we actually started regulating the amount of paper we use. We have been spending easily since Friday when FBI case agent Richard Hogg took the stand until today at 4:30 when the judge, just tapped us all out and said, "See you tomorrow," seeing more paper than a little bit. The government is outlawing its case, and it is using a paper trail to do so. And the paper trail, okay, I don't know what happened there, but the paper trail includes such things as bank statements showing overdrafted bank accounts on the part of Councilman Kenyatta Johnson and his wife, consultant Dawn Shavu. It's showing some credit card debt that I can't even wrap my brain around, because if I had an American Express card once upon a time when I was working at Temple University, and I was afraid of it going above like $250 because that was the amount of money I could afford to pay. Unless the university had me doing something and they were going to pay it back, I forgot that card was in my wallet half the time. And so when you see that someone has like a $16,000 American Express debt, you think two things. One, you obviously have some dynamite credit, because American Express, for those of you who don't know how American Express cards work, American Express, you have to pay it back the next month when you spend something. So like say you spend $500 one month, you have to have it back to American Express in a month. So to have a credit card through American Express, you've got some dynamite credit. But to run $16,000 up on it, and what we found out today is that some of those were business expenses that Dawn Shavu was reimbursed for, but it's still kind of eye-popping. And like I said, with all the paperwork that we're seeing here and that we are going to see tomorrow when we go back to court, it's a fascinating case. At least what the government is trying to say, which is basically Kenyatta and his wife were in such dire financial straits they had to take a bribe, and that bribe was in the form of a job that she wasn't actually doing. When we left today, her lawyer, a gentleman named Barry Gross, was showing or trying to show just how much work she was actually doing. So by this time next week, hopefully I'll have more to share with the folks at Hall Monitor than the fact that I have seen more paper than anyone should if we're serious about dealing with our environment. But I guess this is how the Justice Department puts on a case, with lots and lots of paper.
Any surprises so far?
You know, not really, except for like Janie Blackwell came to court on Monday to support her former colleague, Councilman Kenyatta Johnson. And because the government was still putting on this very paper heavy case, she fell asleep in the gallery, and folks had to wake her up. In fact, there have been a couple of times where people have been snoring behind me, during the trial. And probably the one surprise that I have gotten out of this is the makeup of the jury, despite the fact that like the jury is mostly white, but it's also very young. Normally you get like much older people that participate in federal trials, but that wasn't the case this time. You have millennials in the jury box. So it's going to be interesting to see what they think as opposed to what their older peers would think about this.
Well, thank you, Denise, for that update, and we'll be looking forward to talking more about that next week and as the weeks go on. Well, because it's next week and then the week after, I think that's what it's scheduled.
Well, they say it's going to be a 3-week trial, but I don't believe them. Case agent Hogg is only the third witness that was called. The first witness was the CEO of the new person in charge of Universal Homes, which I am finding is the epitome of a family business, and we can get into that next time. And the second person was Carl Dranoff. And for those of you who don't know much about this case, at the center of the case is the former Royal Theater on South Street, which Universal used to own before it was sold. And the RDA was getting ready to take it back because they bought it from the RDA for like a pittance of what it was worth, a pittance of what they sold it for. They sold it for $3.7 million. And because it was in such bad shape and they hadn't done anything with it right away, the RDA was about to come and get it. And what Kenyatta is being accused of is taking a bribe to help Universal keep this building.
Okay.
So we're going to be there for a while.
I think so. That's what it sounds like. So, well, we commend you for doing that. I don't know that I'd have the patience.
Actually, I'd rather be watching tomorrow's budget hearing because I love budget hearing time. Do you know if it's going to be live, if it's going to be virtual?
Oh, I think it's going to be virtual, I think, because the mayor makes the appearance in city council. Mm-hmm. So it'll be during the city council meeting.
Okay.
So it's the Super Bowl for nerds like us, I think. And I'm very excited by it. And I will get you a copy of it
Please
as soon
do.
as it's over. So you won't have to worry about that.
Please
So
do.
Speaking of budget, this afternoon, the mayor's office held a briefing for reporters about the budget. And earlier this morning, I was preparing a PowerPoint to kind of give a budget primer to our audience as to what to look out for. And I threw it all away because they actually gave us the specifics of what this budget's going to be. So we have a few minutes left. I literally just took the PowerPoint that the administration created.
Hey, that's what they made it for.
Yep. So I'm going to show you a couple of things on that. And I'll give you, next week, we're going to spend a lot of time on budget because we're going to have two big guests. We're going to have Marissa Waxman, who's the city budget director, and she's going to come on and explain to us how they came up with this budget, what some of the key items are. And we're going to have City Controller Rebecca Reinhardt going to be on with us too to talk about maybe looking at it from the other point of view, like where are some of the things that we really need to keep an eye on? What are some of the things that could have been done better? Those kinds of things. So we're going to have two kind of different views next week, which I think is going to be really interesting. But before we get to that, I want to show you a couple of things here. And I got to share my screen. Here's hoping I can do this the correct way. Yes. I'm doing this. And I'm doing this. There we go. So can we all see that? All right. I'm going to assume we can. So one of the things that the city wanted to highlight is that they're making significant investments in anti-violence programming, infrastructure, and education. And if you feel like you've heard this before, it's because you have. It's one of those. It's the three major things that city council offices will tell you they get asked about the most. And number one actually is probably infrastructure, in terms of roads and things like that. But anti-violence and education are right there as well. So the city in this budget, in this iteration of the budget, is looking to make more of an impact and more of an investment. So you're looking at $184 million for anti-violence programming, which is an 18.5% increase over last year's budget. You're looking at $181 million in new borrowing to support capital spending, which is infrastructure. So they're talking about paving and ADA ramps. And one of the things that we had learned from a hearing a couple weeks ago, when we talk about the fixing the roads, 70% of that budget goes towards ADA compliance. And really only about 30% of that budget goes towards actually fixing pavement on the roads. So they're going to borrow some money to do more paving and working on roads. And they're also going to send $100 million to SEPTA, which gets money from different places. And education, the school district of Philadelphia is going to get $270 million. Community college is going to get $50 million. And they're going to put almost $11 million into the Cato Scholarship and 300 new pre-K slots. So that's what the administration is planning on right now. And when we look at the actual budget itself, now I'll explain this quickly. We'll get into it more next week. When there's multiple facets to the budget, and when we talk about the $5.6 billion budget that we're talking about now, that's the operating budget. The entire budget for the city is just over $12 billion. But those are things like the capital budget, that includes the airport and SEPTA that get money from different places. So that doesn't exactly factor into the operating budget, which is city expenditures for personnel and things like that. And like I said, we'll talk more about that next week and explain how that comes together. But this year, the city is looking at a $5.6 billion budget, operating budget, which is about $200 million more than last year. And if you look at the trajectory of budget increases over the course of the Kennedy administration, this is about what it's been for the entire tenure of Kennedy's administration. So we're looking at, and this is where it might get a little interesting. We're looking at a $5.5 billion revenue through the various taxes and other ways the city gets revenue, $5.6 billion in expenditures, yet maintaining $152 million fund balance. So you're probably wondering, well, how is that possible? We're spending more than we're bringing in, yet we're still going to have a balance. Well, some of that money is money that the city had in reserve before, so it's getting carried over. And we're also factoring in the American Recovery Plan funds, of which the city is going to spend about $350 million this year. Those funds have to be drawn down by the end of 2024. And we're going to talk more about that next week. One of the things that I asked in this budget briefing was what are we talking about in terms of anti-poverty funding? And Marissa Waxman, who will join us next week, and we'll talk a little bit more about that with her. She said, when you look at Housing Trust Fund, which is getting more funding and other initiatives throughout the city, there is a concerted effort to make a dent in poverty. And like I said, we'll talk more about that next week when we have her on the program. So that was a very, very quick synopsis of where we are with the budget. We're going to get into that a lot more. It'll also be in our newsletter this week. And next week, like I said, we will have Marissa Waxman, the city budget director, and the city controller, Rebecca Reinhardt, on the program. I'd like to thank you all for being with us. Lance and Denise, thank you as always. Allison behind the scenes. Shelby, our new person behind the scenes. We'll see you all next week.
Have a good night, everybody.